What if Naruto was neglected and rejects the path of a shinobi and becomes something more powerful than that? Let's find out. But before we start, I want you guys to please like, share and sub. This really helps. Naruto Nai-san was very kind. He sat there and let her eat everything she wanted. She hadn't eaten like this for so long. Her clothes had once been clean, but now they were dirty and no one played with her anymore. Now there was no money. No food. No one smiled. Everyone was sad. Shiho hated it when everyone was sad. Tell me about yourself, Naruto Nai-san said, so Shiho did. Her name, she told him, was Shiho Tsujikawa. Her father fled AIM a generation ago and made his way to Wave, where he started a textile business which burgeoned. Her mother was a merchant's daughter. The best mother in the world, Shiho said proudly. Her father was a fair man, a proud man, a man with a backbone. He was the best father ever. He talked all the time about justice and peace, pity and love, so when Gado had come to their land and spun his vast web of evil, her father had been amongst the first to take a stand. He had funded people, he had said things, he had raised his voice against what went on and how his workers and his countrymen suffered, and for this crime he lost his head. They came to her house a year ago and stabbed him to death before her eyes. She remembered a blur of red and the screams which would never stop, not even in her dreams. She heard them now when she told her story and her eyes watered. But Naruto Nai grasped her hand and smiled so kindly that her heart twisted and the voices faded. She was happy again. Father died, she said. Mother wept and held her and covered her ears and turned her head away from the carnage. They'd run when the house was set ablaze. They'd lost their house that night. They'd lost everything. They had nothing now and were nobodies. Shiho was sad for a while, but then she realized father was in a better place and that it was up to her to take care of mother. So she took to flower selling. Mother was sad these days. She never answered back and her eyes had a vacant look. She dressed up every night and went to places, and when she returned she was mottled with bruises. Last night her lips were swollen. Most nights her face was swollen too, and she bled a lot and wept, and her sobs were so loud that it frightened Shiho. But Shiho always went and hugged her, then applied their homemade salve over her wounds. It made mother happy. She smiled through her tears. But the bruising never went away. It was hard now. It was hard to be like this every day. The flowers would not bloom and the crops died. A lot of the time there was nothing to eat. Shiho lost hope on some days, but Kaizanai said everything would be alright and Kaizanai always kept his word. He was the best big brother in the world, and though he had no money and though he walked on a wooden leg, he had a voice like a cannon and it gave them all hope. He said such nice things. That in a month there would be food to eat. That the world would be at their feet. That someday father would get a memorial and Shiho could live in the big house that she once lived in and be a little princess. But Shiho did not want to be a princess. She just wanted people to laugh again. She wanted mother to not cry so much. Yes, that was it. She wanted mother to be happy. Naruto Nai was gripping the table. He was gripping the table so hard that it cracked and his fingers were white and a wood splinter went in and his hands bled. But he did not notice. He was upset too now. Everyone in her life was upset. She upset everyone. It was in the midst of such thoughts that she began to cough. It devolved into breathless hacks and soon delved into the envenomed depths of sickness. By the end blood dribbled down her mouth like froth uncontained or rill unconstrained and left wet red splotches on the table. Little lumps of food floated in that semi-solid mishmash of spit, blood and bile. She sniffled, wiped her mouth, then turned to talk to Naruto Nai, only to see that his rage had turned into horror. The color fled from his face. He looked like a scaredy cat scrambling up a tree or else clinging to a ledge. The thought was funny to her so much so that even through the pain in her chest and the wickerwork of blood decorating the dusty table she laughed. She laughed loudly. And began to cough again. Stop. There was a wrongness to how his voice shivered and cracked. It reminded her for some reason of bits of broken glass or of the needles of a pine that she'd run her hands through. They too quivered the same way. He looked sad. He looked like he was about to cry. But that couldn't be right. Men did not cry. She had never seen a grown man cry. No, that wasn't right either. What was it that Kaizanai said to her last week? He carried her on his shoulders and took her to Wave's outskirts, then showed her a lighthouse and got her an ice lolly. He pointed to the ships and the sea and spoke with reverence of a land beyond where men were free. She asked him why mother cried, why he did not. Is it because you're a man? She asked. And he became sad. Kaizanai said it wasn't like that. Mother wept because mother was a lot stronger than he was. She went to work every day despite her tears and suffered through countless cruelties. She suffered the worst things a woman could. She did it because she loved Shiho, he said. His love for the land, he said, would never be like mother's for Shiho. Izanai said men cried too, but men that led never shed a tear because they had the tears of 1,000 Shihos and her mothers to tend to carry with them. If he cried, he said, a land would lose hope. Shiho did not quite understand, but she knew there was something very wrong about the tears of Naruto Nai. So she did the first thing that came to mind. She jumped out of her seat and hugged him. And though the sense of wrongness did not go away, he relaxed a little. He patted her head and said she would be okay. And Shiho was happy again. It was such a beautiful day. Satsuki discovered a desolate strip of barren land on the outskirts of Wave. This, she said, would be their training ground. A week off was already considerable, she said. Sitting idle for another month and half made no sense. Naruto protested. He had other things on his mind, a child about to die, for example. He left out the last bit. Of course it was not a confidence he wished to share with someone who demanded that he scavenge the carcass of this ruin. Plunge it into deeper misery, she had implied, by either dissuading its figurehead or else condemning him to his doom. Satsuki ignored him and repeated her statement on training in a tone which brooked no argument, then pinned him in place with such a frigid stare that he unwillingly conceded to her demands. And so they returned to training, and with it returned a litany of agonies. She stuck to taijutsu, maintained that his fundamentals needed a little more brushing up before they moved on. And so the hours went by in a volley of blows, a rain of kicks. He'd improved, he thought he blocked less with his face. Naruto had a sense of her movements now. He could read her well. When she pressured, he bobbed and weaved. When she produced a flurry of strikes, he brought his hands up and sustained the sting of her taps. When she circled or tried cutting him off, he maintained his distance and forced her to switch up her patterns. Yes, he had grown, he anticipated, and reacted even to her changes in level and rhythm. He fell for fewer feints. By the end, though he couldn't touch her yet, she offered him a nod of encouragement. That nod, despite his present unrest, meant a lot. It was the first bit of validation he had received in forever. They stopped and she offered him a water bottle. How's your investigation coming along? He stopped gulping down his canteen, pushed away the sweat-covered locks which had drifted into his eyes, and shook his head with a grimace. Not well. Considering the look she shot him, she did not believe him. Have you even tried? Yep. He went back to chugging down his canteen. And? No one saying shit. It was the truth. After he asked Shiho what her problem was, she did not know there was no doctor in Wave anymore, and all she knew was that her mother told her it would someday get better on its own. He left her with some money, took her flowers, and spent the rest of the day quizzing everyone he ran into about Kaiza. Where the man lived, where he worked, what he looked like. These were decrepit people, dying both on the outside and the inside, but every time that name was mentioned, their lips would pinch into a thin line, their brows would contract with a guarded ferocity, their eyes would gleam with a singular intensity. They'd straighten their spines and glare at him, going for a moment from the specters they'd become to the men and women they once were. His question reversed the corrosion of tyranny and time, stoked the fires of resistance which were else absent. Then they'd ignore him entirely and walk past, or else spit out Shinobi, as though it were a curse. In some instances they even wondered why he asked who was he, what did he want, did he work for Gato? And Naruto found himself tongue-tied, unwilling and unable to lie. He'd ask Shiho about Kaiza too, of course. But other than the crumb that Kaiza was like her big brother, he couldn't quite wheedle anything else out of her. Not that he was interested in pursuing that line of investigation, considering how ill the girl was. Yet there still remained a mystery. The part of Naruto dully wondered why Satsuki was doing this at all. She obviously knew who the man was and where he lived. So why send him to do this? Why turn this into a game? His mind supplied an answer. A small segment he had read an eternity ago about boar hunting. About how the boar, even when cornered and about to die, fought back with savagery, fought to its last breath, fought against fate itself, and how none of it mattered. All that the futility of its struggle achieved was to enthuse the hound snapping at its heels or the troglodyte spearing it, so that its death itself became a blood sport, an event, a form of entertainment. And he was sickened. Satsuki seemed to notice how quickly his mood soured. This he guessed due to how she stopped asking him questions. He handed her back the canteen. They started back towards their residence in silence. Yet Naruto still had a favor to ask, one related to a sick little girl. So, after a bout of internal strife, and after much balking and hemming and hawing, he tentatively raised the subject in the most discreet manner possible. So, I was thinking, he began. That's never a good sign. Sarcasm. He grinned. Wonderful. Now you're using my weapons against me. She shrugged. I'm a quick learner. Cute. He was tickled despite himself. But as I was saying, I was thinking, maybe I should be a medic. No. Well, that sure was fucking inconvenient. The fuck? Why not? Because it's a dead-end job. She stopped and turned to look at him. It's a field overrun by pedestrian nobodies without a drop of talent or chakra to go around between the lot of them. It's worthless, bar as a side skill. It's a human litter box, it's where the trash goes. Naruto could feel the condescension dripping from every syllable. He almost felt personally attacked. Almost. That's really harsh. What about Tsunade? Satsuki smirked. And who else, besides Senju Tsunade? Name me 3 specialist medics in history who are worth a ryo. Precisely. She turned away and resumed walking. Hey, come on now, he called, jogging after her. We can reinvent that wheel, you know. Give it renown. Can already see it. Uzumaki Naruto, heir to Tsunade's throne. Hide your cough syrups, your tourniquets, your scalpels. The heartthrob, the man, the myth, the legend has arrived, and he's here to operate. Outstanding fanfiction. She rolled her eyes. I know just the man to hook you up with. Jiraiya-sama needs a novel writing apprentice, I've heard. The fuck's a Jiraiya? Trust me, you don't want to know. There was a haunted look to her. They pondered philosophically over that statement and its connotations for 10 seconds. Seriously, though, Naruto said, why not be a medic? Satsuki sighed. Stopped altogether. What you have, for obvious reasons, is a surplus of chakra, she replied. It makes refinement very hard, but complements anything based on endurance and damage. It's raw power weaponized. You can simply outlast people and eat them alive once they tire. There was an unfocused look to her eyes. She was recollecting something. Take it from someone who has fought that type of opponent before, she continued, you either find a way to finish them off quickly, or else you are in trouble, because even as you're running on empty they are in the ascendancy and have barely begun to break a sweat. They're by far the most difficult kind of adversary one can run into. There's no out-enduring them. You're either significantly superior, or you're dead. The last sentence emerged in a sibilant whisper. She'd gotten more passionate and tunnel-visioned as she went on, lost in her own head. Naruto wondered if she'd forgotten he existed. Meh. Don't want that, though. That snapped her out of whatever zone she'd gone into. She zeroed in on him. Why wouldn't you want it? Satsuki glared at him as though he'd pissed on her father's grave. I dunno. He scratched his cheek. Don't like hurting people. Let's heal him instead. Then you're severely limiting yourself. You'll never have the precision to be a top-tier medic. You hurt my feelings. Be serious for a second, Naruto. Everything about you screams excess and chaos. You're meant to dominate on the battlefield. It's also why I don't bother teaching you kenjutsu. Too precise, too niche, and it'd be a total waste of your skillset and your inbuilt advantages. How fucking cute. She actually thought he wanted to learn kenjutsu in the first place. Still, it would not do to piss her off. Not here, not now, not with Shiho's life possibly on the line. So Naruto went with it. But swordplay looks so cool, man. For the likes of you, it'd be a crutch. Okay, then. He locked his arms behind his head, whistled, overtook her, turned around, maintained eye contact, and walked backwards. So, say someone comes at me with one of those pointy stabby things. Then what, huh? If someone comes at you with one, then you put some distance and redecorate the terrain. A sword's about as threatening as a toothpick against a good ninjutsu user. He grinned. So I just go, boom. Yes. He caught a flicker of a half smile. Yes, you do that. Silence made a return. A pleasant one this time. He couldn't leave it like that, though. Okay, so no career as a medic, then. Naruto made a conscious effort to sound as meek and humble as possible. Can ya, teach me bits and pieces though? Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. What's with this sudden interest in medicine? Ah, nothing. Nothing. I was just kinda wondering, that's all. Naruto. Okay, look. So there's this kid, alright. I ran into her yesterday, at the market. Got talking and all. Pumped her for info, the way you asked me to. Didn't get nothing out of her. But she's puking blood and stuff. And it's just real sad to watch, sensei. She's a swell kid too, you know. Just poor. And you want to learn medicine within a month to help her. Well, yeah, kinda. Satsuki shook her head and pinched the bridge of her nose. You idiot. There was a fondness to how she said it. If you need help, then all you have to do is ask. Shiho was easy to wean away from her flower selling and easier to persuade. The girl trusted with ease and seemed eager to please. Despite her illness, she bounced about like a puppy sent into overdrive at the prospect of an evening jaunt. She'd taken a liking to him, she said. Naruto believed her too, for it was in how her eyes softened, in how she rushed forward and offered him a hug. She skipped about and smiled and hummed a peppy tune before taking the hand he offered her, then demanded a popsicle in exchange for his suggested medical examination this provided. Her eyes were lodestars of delight. And a rosy hue flushed her emaciated face. There was life in her yet, Naruto thought. He desperately wished she would stay that way. There was a purity to her. She was innocence itself, undaunted by the world, untainted by the wreckage around. Despite the devastation wrought upon this land, she was unbroken. Through its ever-growing gloom and the shadow of its doom, she was a beacon. Shiho had not lost her laughter, she winged the ether despite her sickness. She was a spirited nightingale trilling through this long night of tragedy, a lone voice unknowingly raised, a halberd against atrocity. She was an upbeat epitaph scratched upon this tomb to humanity. She rekindled something in him, something he thought long dead, a spark of hope. And with it came the agony of a resistance for too long quelled, now reawakened, even if only for a transitory moment, a fleeting visitant. He looked around and saw the seeds of oppression sown all about him, and, as the girl chattered on, Naruto found himself hoping that Kaiser, that wretched former shinobi turned fisherman, would succeed in his cause. That wave would be free. It was a furtive thought, hounded out by pragmatism a second after it emerged. But he had thought it, nonetheless, and for a moment he willed it with all his heart. He led the girl to a rundown playground. Satsuki awaited them there. Shiho was unaffected by her presence. He'd explained to the girl that this was the healer. The park bench was turned into a temporary infirmary. Lie down. There was a gentleness to how Satsuki spoke, one he'd never heard before. He watched her kneel and was struck with disbelief at the metamorphosis which took place before his eyes. Part by part she divested herself of the shinobi she was. The air of authority evaporated, the indifference of eye and the nonchalance of countenance was smoothed over into a look of concern. She whispered endearments, lavished praise, gemstones of encouragement rolled off her tongue with effortless ease. Shiho, who at the beginning of the examination had been tense, giggled and wriggled, blushed and chirped, and in response to a question once more recycled her entire family history. And Satsuki offered her looks of understanding, lauded her on, nodded at the right points, sighed in regret at the right points, clucked her tongue, shook her head, stroked Shiho's hair, held her hand, ran over her chest with one palm, a consistent diagnostic. And through it all injected into the entire procedure such an energetic air of sisterly sympathy that Naruto was left scratching his head. He was tempted to rub his eyes and wonder if he was hallucinating. At first he suspected this was a fabrication on her part, a persona temporarily adopted, but as it went on, and as she slipped further and further from the cold cocoon of what she used to be, and further into a butterfly-esque beauty, a sprite-winged spring-like mellifluity, he grew increasingly convinced that Uchiha Satsuki, quite by accident, had exposed to him a side of hers that she either wanted to keep unknown or was herself not aware of. And, as it continued, Naruto was totally lost, unable to reconcile the affection and the levity here with the cold clipped tones from a week ago when she had commanded him to sway that fisherman or else be complicit in his murder. Before him now was no stone-cold killer squint hard enough, and it was easy to forget that she upheld an unjust system, slew people over it. The impression she left as she wove her palm over Shiho's chest, and as the mellow sun in turn wove through her unbraided hair its violin bow, was one of everlasting beauty, of kindness and piety. There was a sun-struck ribbon of auburn in her hair, and with it shimmered before him an illusion. One of benevolence, of an affability and demeanor that superseded the petty plagues of skin and flesh, and cradled the world. He felt he was missing half a puzzle. It was maddeningly frustrating, and at the same time maddeningly entrancing. He teetered from the precipice of bafflement to the brink of being smitten. The more she inadvertently revealed, the more she confused him, the further she devolved into a set of contradictions, so much so that shuttling back and forth between these spontaneous and seemingly irreconcilable switches in personality was vertigo-inducing. How on earth could someone at the same time be both kind and cruel, emotionless and emotional, humanitarian and inhuman, irritable and immovable, celestial and chimeric? Which was the person, which was the mask? Was there, in fact, even a person there at all? Or was she just a consummate shinobi? Was she, in other words, a chameleon? An actor? A born liar, a hollow manipulator, a perpetual blank canvas that mimicked what it wished to, became what it wished to, remolded itself when necessary, able to enchant one moment and exploit the next? Was he important to her, or was he expendable? He did not know. Lord help him, he did not know. What he knew, however, was that he was drawn to her. He watched her chatter away with the child and hold the setting sun under her spell. Time itself seemed her thrall. It might have slowed to a crawl or streamed by, slumbered or lumbered or leapt, seconds or centuries might have passed in the midst of his amorous paralysis, and he would be none the wiser for it. All he could see through the fog of his thoughts was her half-smile, and the quiescent kindness that dwelled there. All he could observe was how her face blossomed under the torrential rains of sympathy and passion, and thus became more bewitching with every passing moment. All he could see was how humanity and inhumanity blended in her, how they blurred, and all he could ponder on was how he ought to have been repulsed, but instead was drawn, as though to a stainless radiance, or to a spider web, a death trap. Yes. He was drawn to her. She was very attractive, and her being an enigma was somehow more tempting than it ought to have been. It should have been an uncomfortable admission. So why the fuck did he not feel very uncomfortable in making it to himself? Tuberculosis. That got him out of his head. Satsuki's smile was still in place, but now he could see the rough edges to it, the strain it was under. He could see the sheer artificiality of it. And that shattered the spell. In her defense, there was not much to smile about in the present moment. What? It was tuberculosis. The girl by her side was laughing and kicking the ground, seemingly in her own world. Can you fix it? I already have. And in saying that, Satsuki offered him a small smile, this one genuine. His shoulders sagged with relief. Yes, this place was an atrocity-ridden hellhole. Yes, the inhumanity of the conditions here had inspired this illness in the first place. But the girl was alright now. She would still offer the world her smiles, still spin her yarn of eternal hope, still grow, even if it be in the corrupted womb of this void. And in that moment, it was all that mattered. He felt as if he'd swilled on a heady cocktail of emotion, and there was an addlement which came with it. Gratitude and infatuation melded into each other. They took his heart to such extremities, distended it in such ways, whispered such sweet nothings into his ear, that he grinned. For a moment, and just for a moment, the world despite its cruelties was a shrine of joy. And that was quite enough. I like what you did on the first day of our training. They were at their makeshift training ground. When I mugged you off and left you with a bill. No, the day after that. Our first spar. What about it? The aggression. I want more of that and less reactivity. Can't do when you're getting your face kicked in, though. Paradoxically, by being reactive against a superior foe you let them control you. They have an ice age between every shot, they have the time to scheme and strategize, to set traps and pick at your defensive shape till they create an opening. They might not catch you cleanly, but they put you under such immense pressure that with every passing second the result becomes imminent. Your concentration starts to go, at some point you make an error, and that ends it. Such an opponent is not going to be taken out on the counter. Try taking initiative and accept the risks as they come. She dragged him out of bed at 5 in the morning for this. Naruto had a feeling this was going to be a daily occurrence. He yawned. Tried blinking away the sleep. I did, he said, and I spent a day with an ice pack and a broken wrist. You were losing to me that day, no matter what. Consider this a general principle, not a hard and fast rule. If the opponent is way beyond you, then create a distraction and run. Captain. He shot off an ironic salute, then yawned again. I will tell you this. Satsuki had a look of discontent on her face. I am not happy with your progress so far. It is fantastic for an average genin, but you and I know you are far from average. Am I? Aren't you? Relative to the talent I sense, your growth has been limited. You keep saying talent this, talent that, but I ain't feeling it, you know. I feel pretty cold on the inside. Maybe you got the wrong guy. You learned elemental manipulation as a child and have nearly mastered the Rasengan. You did not need a mentor for either. Name me one student from the academy who can claim the same. Different conditions, different time. Yes. And I'm asking you to roll back the clock. Aight. I'm trying, though. I'm trying the best I can. Honest. You are not. I see grit, but no fire. I see a man mentally checked out go through the motions, as though running through a checklist. I think you'll regret this blasé attitude of yours someday. But I'll leave it be and accept your answer for now. Let's move on to other things. Let's talk about techniques. Which ones? Ninjutsu? Aight. Got something in mind. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, I have a theory I'd like to share with you. She seemed excited. She was in her element. Sure. You don't even gotta ask. You're the teacher here. The big mistake I've seen Shinobi make, even at the highest level, is that they treat ninjutsu as a supplementary skill set. To all too many, it is a flashy bombardment of disconnected mid to long range attacks. They either throw at full power, with no thought behind it, or use it reactively as a counter to someone else's techniques. It is explosive this way, but hardly ever effective, all it does is drain you quicker. When used like this, it is of limited potential. You are using it to test speed and evasion, but not much else. With me so far. Naruto found he quite liked her when she was like this. One could see the passion brimming, the dedication, the hours upon hours spent perfecting this craft, and that to him was worthy of admiration, even if the subject under scrutiny was murder and the efficiency of it. Yeah, I think so. Good. Now, if I were to say that taijutsu is about punches and kicks, Satsuki demonstrated by erratically throwing her arms about, just thrown like so, as hard as possible, with nothing but instinct to guide it, then I'd be laughed out of the room, and with good reason. She modulated her erratic movements, added an element of fluidity to it, shifted, ducked, weaved, bounced in and out, so that where there had once been clumsiness, now there was only grace. Taijutsu at the highest level is well honed, she said, coming to a halt, her point made. It is a refined art form with 100 different styles and variations, each having its own patterns and combinations. Yet say the same to someone about ninjutsu ... and they goggle at you as though you are talking in another language. So not one-off attacks. He inserted a finger in his ear. Doug. The look of revulsion on her face was adorable. No, not one-off attacks, she said, staring at his ear, his finger. Combinations. I want you to think of it as an art having its own language. It's not about an accumulation of techniques or being a walking ninjutsu repository. It's about your thought processes and your combinative efficiency. The good shinobi can take down an army with just C and D rank techniques well combined, whereas a bad one, even if given a repertoire of S rank techniques, would be none the better for it. So, in summary ... In summation, don't just throw. Think. What does this technique do? What do I hope to accomplish with it? What can I combine it with? If your answer is, I intend to blow this place sky high, or this is a distraction that I'm using because I'm out of ideas, or even, I'll throw, and whatever happens, then that isn't sufficient. Satsuki got more animated as she went on, more into it. Warfare is by definition unpredictable, she continued, and all that we have at our disposal, every single tool we use, is meant to lend predictability to the unpredictable. Ninjutsu is not just a fight ender or an area demolisher. When used well, you can force your opponent into picking from a palette of very limited responses. On the battlefield, a man with limited options is a man about to die. He raised his hand, the way they did in those academy classrooms he had abandoned years ago. For the first time in years he was semi-serious during a theory session. Her speculations were quite interesting, at least if one set aside one's bias. Could you give an example? Naruto asked. She created a clone. It morphed into the image of a generic Kumonin, then skipped away and took up a position around 30 paces from them. I want you to watch carefully, Satsuki said, because I expect you to break down my combination for me. It is very basic, but it should be instructive nonetheless. That said, she slalomed into motion. But the sweep of her hand, and at a speed that beggared belief, she sent towards the clone a convex crescent of wind the size of 6 grown men laid horizontally. The ground underneath erupted into a set of lacerations as it shrieked by, the air was a curtain shredded. The clone evaded it by pushing off the ground. It went to its right, then came back down, paying no attention to the terrain behind, devolving into a shower of levitating stone and clod. Yet Satsuki wasn't done. There was an inhuman fluidity to her movements. She shimmied forward and sent another, and when the clone repeated its dodge she sent a third, catching it mid-air, forcing it to produce a blade and intercept. It bisected the crescent, but was given no time to adjust because Satsuki herself had taken off after her wind blade. She wove under the clone's wild swing and kicked it in the ribs. The clone was propelled backwards. Gigantic earthen appendages tore through the ground, grabbed it around the torso mid-flight, and in a symphony of snaps, wrung it like a toothpaste tube, a human handle to a tennis racket. It struggled valiantly, but to no avail. The burst of lightning later the clone's neck wobbled. Its spine was a flower stalk sliced, held together by a flap of reddening skin. Its neck was an ever-growing gash that offered the world its ghastly grin. A geyser gushed forth, and crimsoned the ground. The appendages let go, the head separated from the body, both dropped downwards limply, and were dispelled mid-air. Satsuki landed gracefully on the other side, palms shimmering dark blue. She turned to Naruto and raised an eyebrow. The entire sequence had taken under 5 seconds. Goddamn, that's impressive. He whistled and did not even try hiding his slack-jawed amazement. Despite her best attempts to remain statuesque, there was a slight flush to her cheeks and a pleased glimmer in her eyes. So, she said, what did you learn? To never ever piss you off, that's for sure. Naruto. Alright. Lem think. Full disclosure, though I was busy admiring ... and that happened way too fast. Try anyway. If you picked up on even a few things, I'll be pleased. Okay. Let's see. He closed his eyes and reimagined the scene. Wind, taijutsu, earth, lightning, all in under 5 seconds, all accompanied by a flurry of constant movement. The transition between natures and the total lack of either build-up or hand signs was fucking flawless, as was the lack of tells. She had been inscrutable, unreadable. It had seemed as if she could do anything, go any way. Yet even in the midst of that chaotic sequence, even amidst that rain of devastation, she had radiated an aura of calmness, of authority, of being in total control. There was a definite method to her madness. What he had witnessed was controlled chaos elevated to art form. Ninjutsu is not just a fight ender or an area demolisher, she had said. When used well, you can force your opponent into picking from a palette of very limited responses. And on the battlefield, a man with limited options is a man about to die. He opened his eyes. That wind technique, he said. The size of it. Like, really horizontal. Really wide. You took away the clone's ability to go left or right. Only way it could go was up. Up, then pick a direction, not direction first. Very good. She offered him an encouraging nod. Theoretically, he could also go into the earth or parry, but those are irrelevancies we may safely discard for the moment, since this is a limited exercise. Besides, the former enables my primary nature, which is lightning, while the latter eventually transposes into the first combinative line. You may continue. You did it twice, though. Why would you hang on a sec? He closed his eyes again and reimagined it. He wanted to note how he reacted the first time. He sounded tentative, even to himself. We do it in hand-to-hand combat. Note quirks and stuff, you know. Like he'd go up, but which direction and all. Instinct. People tend to go the same way over and over while acting on instinct. Her eyes shone with something akin to pride. It made his heart swell. He'd never seen anyone look at him that way before. Yes, she said. Not always true, but more often than not yes. The first blade helped me assess his reflexes. It gave me a better idea of the distance I wanted to fight at. He gave me a tell in picking a side, too. A rough one, sure but it is enough. Attention to detail is the difference between life and death at this level, and you are doing very well so far. So the second time he went the same way, you no, wait you set up the earth technique first, didn't ya? I did. Satsuki offered him another nod. B rank. No hand signs necessary, at least for a good shinobi. A rank and above, we'd use it, but this was my point. Sometimes economy and speed are preferred to raw power. I set the trap, and I set it quickly. If I'd woven through hand signs or opted for power, then there'd be no combination. The scheme falls to pieces. So you set it behind him, anticipating the direction he'd dodge in. If he'd gone the other way the second time then I'd be down a little energy, and I'd leave the technique dormant for later. Remember, the terrain is your friend. Visualize it. Use it. It is a useless strategy against a Hyuga or a sensor, but then again, most shinobi are neither. So that's it. I got everything right. More or less. The one thing I think you noticed, but failed to mention, is distance management. Air movements up and down. Yes. Satsuki nodded. Say it after me. Distance management is our god. In what way? The range you fight at determines everything. You want to be in a situation where you can evade by a hair's breadth if necessary, but no more and no less. That's the ideal range. Too close, and you're dead, too far, and while you're defensively better in a ninjutsu bout and have more time to dodge, your attacks are a non-starter. Aight. What's the ideal range for a guy like me? An elite jonin, she said, would try keeping a distance of 25 paces at all times. I keep 18, but my entire style is speed and precision based. For you she thought for a second. 35 paces. Let's go with that. At all times. Yes. Like, even in the middle of attacks. Yes. Cut it if you are willing to risk getting hit or need to transition into taijutsu. Increase the distance if you are happy dodging and need time to think. But else, yes. Consistent distance at all times, even when under pressure. So, like, if they take 4 or 5 steps forward or move backwards by the same amount. You move the same distance with them, in the same direction. You assess how many steps they've taken, and you move even as they are moving. That's at the core of every ninjutsu fighter's style. That sounds really difficult, not gonna lie. He did not like the sadistic smile on her face. It is, she cooed. It is very, very hard, and it needs to be drilled till it becomes instinct. So today, her smile widened, today you will be assessing distance and learning how to dodge. I don't like the sound of that. I do. She reached out and patted him on the head. And I'll definitely like the sounds you make. Fuck. 35 paces, Satsuki pointed. Go stand at 35 paces from me. You'll assess distance at a glance, and you'll dodge. Dodge what? Why, the streaks of lightning I throw at you. You're a sadist. I've been told that before. She nodded sympathetically. Now go. 35 paces. He skipped away. Squinted. Took up a position that he thought best satisfied her parameters. She flicked her fingers. A thread of lightning spurted across the terrain and nicked his nose before he even had the time to think. He went down, landed on his butt, held his nose, which stung and smoked. That was 32, she called out. She was in a good mood. Back on your feet. Satsuki took a few steps forward so that he could no longer just take 3 steps back and be done with it. We go again. Fuck. And on it went till dawn turned into morning and morning into midday. They had a 10-minute break for lunch, but after that it was back to this terrifying, nose-singeing proposition. It was easy enough to get a handle on the technique when they both were static. That took him half an hour. But then she added movement to the mix, and all of a sudden his calculations were thrown out of whack. He got it wrong by as much as 8 to 10 paces on more than one occasion. "You're enjoying this, ain't ya?" he called towards the end, holding his nose with one hand and pointing a finger in accusation with the other. That last string of lightning would for sure leave a scar. A lot, yes. And she was. It was the happiest he'd seen her. Uchiha Satsuki was truly having fun at his expense. "Fuck's sake," Naruto grumbled, "at least pretend there's some kindness in your cold dead heart." Stargazing. There was something to be said about the freedom it brought. To sit there, atop the house, to pretend one was a mote of dust, an insect that the cosmos itself ignored, it was a liberating sensation. So Naruto did not notice when she crept up on him, did not realize she was there till she plopped down next to him, a cup of tea in her hand. He looked at her out of the corner of his eye, saw that she too was staring at the sky. So he said nothing, gave her space. She held out the cup. Placed it right under his nose. "For you," Satsuki said. "I made it." He did a double take. Stared at the tea. Stared at her. She was still looking at the sky. Stared at the tea again. Stared at her again. Rubbed his eyes. "For me?" he echoed. "That's what I said, yes." "Is it poison, sensei?" "The most potent kind." "I'm hurt, you know." "Hurts right here." Naruto tapped his heart. "Thought for a second we had a thing going on." Her lip quivered. She continued stargazing. "Drink it," she said. "Found a replacement for me?" "That kid I healed, she was cute. Less of a loser, too." He took the cup. Sniffed at it. It did not smell rancid. Hell Shiho Naruto Nai went out frothing at the mouth, like a man. He sent a quick prayer to the heavens. Bottoms up. Gulped down the drink. Sighed. Stared at the empty cup. Set it down on his lap. Then considered throwing himself off the rooftop, or at the very least going downstairs and drinking bleach. It really was poison. I put effort into that. Back at the academy, Naruto announced sadly, I drunk Kiba's piss as a dare. That had more flavor to it and a better taste. "This is why you have no friends." She did not sound offended. "And you got none cause they all die of tea poisoning." "That's so stupid." "Your tea stupid. The hell did you learn this abomination from, anyway?" He inspected the cup. Turned it upside down. There had to be a vial of poison in there somewhere. Kunoichi classes. Admittedly, it's been 8 years and my memory's a little foggy. A little. They should airdrop you into Iowa, sister. Go be a chef there. If your tea is this bad, then your culinary skills will for sure start the 4th Shinobi War. "I can't cook." "You," Naruto whispered, horrified, "are a heathen. An absolute Philistine. Need I remind you that only one of us has an appreciation for art?" "Yeah, sure. I'll feed you art books till the end o' time. See how that works out." Satsuki scoffed, but said nothing. Seriously. Naruto grappled with this revelation, this rupture in the fabric of reality itself. "What kind of kunoichi can't cook?" "The kind that's always out of the village," she replied. "We get rations. We are given supplies. Still a life skill. Never took you for the kind to skimp out on shit and all." She looked at him with some amusement. "Why are you so upset over this? The tea wasn't that bad. I had a cup too. The Tastabids are dead." Naruto shook his head, his face clouding over with grief. "Always the case when you take a hit too many to the head. Shinobi lifestyle, man. As opposed to your pristine head movement and your exemplary choice in cuisine." "I can cook." "You?" The surprise on her face was genuine. "You can cook?" "Hell, yeah. I'm a great cook. It's my passion. Remind me to have you make me something to eat." "Ah, nice try. I ain't no sucker." He winked at her. "You ain't gettin' to mooch off me on missions. I'ma make the best food there is and I'ma eat it in front of you. Every single day." "They changed the subject entirely," Satsuki said, and there was a levity in her voice, a gleam of mischief in her eye. "I hold back a lot when we spar. We don't want that to change anytime soon, do we, Naruto? This what you've been reduced to, eh? Beating people up, stealing their lunchboxes." He shook his head. "Making 2 tiffins ain't the biggest chore in the world, I guess." "Good," she said, and he could hear the laughter in that word. "Good." They sat like that for a while. The silence was companionable. For a second there was the illusion that something had shifted, something changed. "You really want to run a shop someday?" she asked. "Huh? What you said to me the other day, back at that ramen stand." Naruto laughed. "Oh, that? Nah, I was just messing with you. So you don't want to run a shop, then?" Won't say that either. Sounds like a plan. It's just the first thing that came to mind the other day. He peered at her. Why? You interested in a partnership or something? No, I was just curious. You haven't given your dreams much thought, have you? I got an unrealistic one, which is running away from all this. That, as you say, is unrealistic. May I suggest a substitute? Oh. So that's why she was here. What a shame. Fuck's sake, not this again. I can feel a speech coming on. Naruto rubbed his head. Closed his eyes. I'm serious, Naruto. Okay, listen. No offense, but the hell gives you the right to tell me what my dreams ought to be? I'm your mentor. Yeah. He laughed. Yeah. So stick to teaching. This is a part of your education. How? What you hope to preserve, Satsuki said, tells the world everything about who you are as a person. Does it, now? It does. A person with dreams is a person you trust when you have your back against the wall. They have a reason to live and will fight by your side to the last breath. And me? You don't think I'd do that? I do not know. You're a drifter. An unambitious lout who fails to recognize his own strength. She hesitated half a second, then sighed in defeat. You're also my friend. I'm sorta touched, not gonna lie. And he was. Never been called that before. So now you see why I must counsel you on this. I'd be neglecting my duties if I were to not do so. And if I don't want your counsel, then I wouldn't force it on you. But I nonetheless implore you to listen to me, if not as your mentor then as your well-wisher. Don't got many of those. Naruto laughed again. Alright. Fine. Share your wisdom, oh great sage. The dream now, as always, should simply be to see tomorrow, she said. And tomorrow. And tomorrow, till someday Uzumaki Naruto is an old man. Close your eyes and imagine this for a second. Witnessing your 70th sunrise while surrounded by your grandchildren, a brood of reprobates who prank you the way you once pranked the world. Why shouldn't that be possible? Why should it stay a dream? To make that happen is a life worth living. To you, not to me. The things one's got to do to keep it alive. Yeah, can't live with that. We've been over this. You know this. I just can't. It's not worth it. Not to me. I will be frank with you. Your thought process has issues. Reality does not care about your idealistic delusions. And we were getting along so well too. Now we're back to lecture mode. What's it with you people and clinging to the coattails of reality, huh? At this moment, Satsuki said, ignoring him, you are an insect and yours is just a lofty ideal that you cower behind. You've nested in the area of your fears and you refuse to take flight. Trust me, there's nothing worse to live with an inadequacy. And no worse way to perish than in weakness. Again, your thoughts, not mine. The worst you can do, he yawned. The absolute worst, it's to show someone a mirror. Just leave em be. Let em dream. Let em live. Let me live. There's dream. She held up a palm. And at the other end, there's delusion. Satsuki held up the other palm. There's a purity to one and a complacency to the other. The first is wheat, the other, chaff. The first must be nurtured, the second stamped out. Ooh. You're a tough girl, ain't ya? He spread his arms wide in a come at me gesture and grinned. Stamp me out, then, sensei. Here I am, stamp the fuck out of me and see how I care. You jest, but I've torn the stuffing out of your type before. She did not seem to take any pleasure in the words. It sounded like a confession. I've ripped up cities which use delusion as their foundation. I've walked through the ashes of their aspirations. I've looked people in the eye and seen their system of values crumble. I've seen what a dead man looks like. Mouth kinda open, starting to smell. Seconds before he dies, she finished with a huff. Don't mock me, you idiot. I've where was I? Yes. I've run through dreamers and talkers and idealists alike, and they all bleed the same, suffer the same. Vacuous bleedings about ideology are always forsaken at death's door, then everyone begs for the same things. Mother, father, family, mercy. None of it is ever given. Not on the battlefield. And that suffering they're suffering, the one of knowing in their last moments that they can do nothing, that they are nothing, it's not something that I ever wish for you to experience. The horror stories you tell me for the village's sake, Naruto said dryly, covering his mouth with one hand and feigning interest. Not for the village, Satsuki said. Not anymore. For you. She stared at him unblinkingly. He felt his ears redden and looked away. For you, she repeated again, slower this time, stressing both syllables. This is about you, because believe it or not, I've come to tolerate you, and it would upset me greatly if you were to die. You're my friend. The village might not miss you, but I would. No one deserves to go through life without ever discovering what they could be. But they will be, if allowed to live long enough. And if something were to happen to you, then the thought of everything you could have been would haunt me. That's honestly the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me, he said, making a funny face and pretending to wipe tears from his eyes, but nonetheless flattered and blanketed by a warm fuzzy feeling that was oh so mushy and gooey and. You're right now, she pushed on, ignoring him, you're a muddle. You say freedom, you say ideal, but all I hear are empty words. You are in a stasis, yours is a self-induced mediocrity. To die this way is to die with regrets. And that's definitely not the nicest. Naruto looked at the sky and laughed. You won't get it, he said softly, eventually. Yeah, you won't. Never will. I'll have regrets, no matter what. Those words mean something to me because my life's a shit heap. And my life's a shit heap because every asshole within a 2-mile radius feels the need to act, to intrude to prove something. Why can't everybody just be still for 1 fucking second and do nothing? Do nothing, man. Just let the world happen to you, instead of, I dunno, pulling strings. Every motherfucker's pulling strings. You're not making sense, Naruto. See? My point exactly. You people just don't get it. Aiza could not be found. It was a conundrum and a half. Naruto went through wave with a fine-tooth comb, but this figurehead seemed more a folk hero than a man of flesh and blood, more a legend lost to the sea of time than a current-day fisherman fanning the flames of rebellion. In this hollowed-out pit of doom, where everything was forgotten and everyone faded without hue and cry, he alone was worthy of memory. He'd clawed his way out, clawed his way back into the light, and now he brought with him a cable and a many-runged ladder. This was not all Naruto heard. Rumors spoke of a mythical figure with a gift for eloquence. He had the tongue of gods, they said. He had a stainless selflessness, an unmatched ardor. He was a deity stolen away from a fane and recast in human form for the sake of their liberation. He was a symbol. He was a luminary. He was their hope and salvation. Yet he was one of them, too. Aye, he was one of them. So when asked about him they closed ranks and sent Naruto on a wild goose chase. Chiho, bless her innocence, one day suggested the bridge. She even gave directions. So he went. And there Naruto met an unfriendly old man named Tazuna, who set aside for a second his flask of liquor and introduced himself as the bridge builder. He pointed over the heads of his laborers, who had broken for lunch, pointed proudly to a hulking, half-finished structure in the distance, which was buffeted by currents and bracketed by clouds. It stretched over the water like a kraken awakened. He called it his baby, his brainchild. The queries about Kaiza he was dismissive. There was no such person, he growled. Shinobi-san was misled. It was Tazuna who was in charge of this entire operation. The country dwellers were rustic ignoramuses, they were barbarians who could not tell their head from their ass. To pass the time they made up baseless rumors and nonsensical fairy tales about some non-existent random. When pressed further he grew hostile and ambled away, but not before spouting dire warnings that carried on them the stench of sake. It was thus that Naruto found himself wandering through Wave's town square, utterly at a loss for answers, and pondering over whom to next consort with or confront. Flowers. Fresh flowers. Flowers, Mayumini-chan. They'd go well with your hair. Only 100 ryo. No. 50. Please. Rent's due next week. And there was Shiho, trying to find herself new customers. Her target this time was a rickety lanky girl who swayed from side to side as she walked. She had the same palsied empty-eyed look that everyone here wore, a second skin. The girl spotted Naruto and hurried away. The land was rife with rumors of his being a shinobi, a god of hire. Shiho, however, waved and pranced up to him. She looked healthy, had a healthy pallor to her face. Her eyes gleamed, her smile had the sun sparkle to it, and, as she fell in step beside him, as she began to enthusiastically fill him in on her day, Naruto found himself smiling with her too. The scream in the distance quashed their peace. It was from behind 2 blocks of huts, from beside the dilapidated beverage house. By the time Naruto hurried over, leaving Shiho trailing by quite a margin, a crowd had gathered. A crowd that cowered and did nothing, they stood and watched. At its center was a wan woman on her knees whom Naruto recognized immediately. He had seen her a fortnight ago. It was the same woman who fled Waraji, the same one who on that night had looked like a spirit. The sunlight in her prostrate position told a very different story. One of sickness and suffering, of despair and dehumanization. She was shrunken, fading fast, there was an unevenness to her posture, and her countenance was constricted in terror. Above her towered a man. He had 2 blades strapped to either side, a set of tattoos and spirals ringed his wolfish visage. Naruto did not even need to ask around to know he was one of Gado's men. Please. The woman whispered. We'll pay the rent. We'll pay the tax too. Just. 1 more week. The man laughed and kicked her in the face. She crumpled. Blood oozed from her maw, blotted the ground. Then with effort she wobbled and pushed back into her former position of prayer. Of plea. Of supplication. Naruto grit his teeth. Balled his palm. You dare beg Zori of the waterfall for mercy, whore. Take your things and get lost. Zori. He knew that name. Waraji had mentioned it too. The other samurai. Gado's enforcer. Bitter resentment welled. Naruto unclenched his palm. Lapsed back into passivity. He could not hurt the client's henchman. Please. The woman sounded like a broken record. Zori reached over and lifted her off the ground by her neck. She kicked at air, purpling. Clawed at nothing. Tears leaked down her eyes. Her voice emerged in guttural gasps, unfinished pleas. I remember you. The look Zori gave her was lascivious. Sexual. It made Naruto want to saw the bastard's neck off with a rusted blunted kunai. Your husband was a piece of work too, wasn't he? Zori bared his teeth. Leaned and we shown him. Oh, we shown him well. The bossmen don't forgive. Now take your shit and get lost if you wanna live. Do nothing. It was a desperate plea to himself, the last dam laboriously straining against and holding back a tidal wave of rage and hate. Suffer. Suffer, and be still, and let the world go by, as it. Mother. Shiho was panting. She'd just caught up. The smile was gone. Her eyes were wide. The wicker basket slipped from her hands. The flowers fell to the ground, were trodden on by the crowd. Someone tried shushing her, restraining her, but with another cry of mother. She rushed forward. Zori backhanded her. Swatted her away, as though she were a fly. Sent her tumbling. She rolled twice. Hit a small rock. Came to a halt. Sat up dazed, her head bleeding. Shiho began to cry. And something deep inside Naruto snapped. He'd drawn into himself to look insignificant. He'd slouched and hunched over, he'd tucked in his chin to stay nondescript. Now he stood to full height. Squared his shoulders. Stepped forward. Stepped out of the crowd. Stepped into the man's vision. Hey, pal. His voice was laced with a tempestuous fury. The fringes of his vision were a blaze of red. How about you pick on someone your own size for a change? He took another step forward. Let her go. The man was taken aback. Then a cruel leer spread across his face. He turned and faced Naruto and squeezed tighter. Make me. And that was all the invitation Naruto needed. At a speed that Zori had no hope of following, no prayer of tracking, Naruto blurred forward. It was the elbow of the extended arm he went for. He was on top of Zori before the man had time to blink. With one palm he trapped the forehand, kept on it a vice-like grip, then pushed downwards. The other he slipped under the elbow and pushed in the opposite direction with the entirety of his strength. There was a gunshot crack, followed by a howl. The fingers were loosened. Zori let go and wrung at his arm in desperation. In an ironic reversal of the sequence from a minute ago, he tried getting away. But Naruto wasn't done. He did not let go. He wasn't thinking. There was a pent-up rage in him that for too long had stayed dormant, and now, in the fog of the moment, with adrenaline rushing through his veins and the siren call of vengeance trilling through his heart, it made perfect sense to hurt this man. To break him, to mar him, to maim him. To revel in the hunted agony in his eyes, to gloat over the fear, the half-formed pleas. Naruto grabbed him by the throat and in a cruel parody of what Zori had done to the woman, heaved him off the ground. He let go of the arm, which bent in the other direction, flapped unnaturally. With his free hand he fired up a Rasengan, which came out perfect, mastered in this moment of madness and malevolence. Naruto brought Zori down to eye level. Reveled in the pig-like terror in those eyes. Reveled in his triumph. Not such a big man now, are ya? He whispered. Plea. With one hand still throttling him, giving him no leverage and nowhere to go, Naruto drove the Rasengan into Zori's ribs. The man's torso exploded outwards in a shower of gore. The remnants of his ribcage were expelled into the air. His organs spattered across the turf. His spleen was ripped out, his spine dangled. His eyes widened in disbelief. The light leaked out, first a sliver then a torrent. Even in death he thrashed about, thrashed till he weakened. In a matter of seconds all motion ceased, and through it all Naruto kept staring into those eyes, mesmerized, hypnotized, the fog in his mind clearing, the beast sated, the sense of what he had done descending upon his reason, which until now had taken a leave of absence. The crowd went silent. Even Shiho stopped crying. She crawled over to her mother, they huddled together. Naruto let go of the corpse. Took 3 unsteady steps backwards. Smelt iron. Smelt the putrid stench of bowels loosened, of innards strewn about. Felt all eyes on him. Looked down at his trembling, reddening palms. Doubled over. Threw up. And began to laugh hysterically. I fucking told ya, we didn't want no one else. Waraji had tears in his eyes. The man was apoplectic with rage. Did not mean to kill the guy. They were in the sitting room, arguing. Naruto had showered, but the shock was still there, pain was a predator gnawing at his haunches. Waraji ignored him. Continued to rant at Satsuki, who had taken a seat atop the study table for this hastily summoned rendezvous. She was in her own world. She ignored the two of them, her nails seemed to be of more interest to her. They bring along some rookie, and now Zori's dead. Dead. He was a family guy, for love oh god. What do I tell his wife, his kids? What do I tell the boss? It ain't my fault that your people are shitbags. A sliver of the former indignation took hold. That piece of shit, he got off on beating people up in the middle of the street. Someone had to put him in place. I didn't mean to kill him, that's all, okay? Oh no, just as maim him I'm sure. Waraji's hands twitched, he was contemplating unsheathing his sword. That guy, he deserved to die, yeah. When the boss hears oh this, you rookie, Waraji spat, you's dead. Oh yeah, you's a dead fucking man, 6 feet under. Your job's over. Get the fuck outta here. Fuck ya, fuck every last one of ya. Imma tell boss, and he gonna get Iwa on the job. First she makes excuses and asks for enough. She said it softly, but they heard her loud and clear nonetheless. All sound ceased at once. She was still studying her nails, she sported a look of bored contempt. There was a peasant revolt on the western front, Satsuki said. It was spontaneous and it was short-lived. Zori was sent to quell it. I offered my aid, but he foolishly refused it. He fought valiantly ... but it ended in tragedy. He was butchered by some peasants and civilians. A fate no less than what he deserved for his brashness and his repulsive weakness. That is what you will tell Gato. Understood? He ain't no one's boss, ye whore, Waraji blustered. Ye don't get ta. There descended upon them a tsunami of pressure. It was like being buried under sheet upon sheet of ice. The pressure was of such potent quality that the air warped and keened, the walls cracked. The slats on the windows shattered, and so did the glass. The glass exploded inwards and rained on them like a whip of knives. Naruto got his arms up in time. The sting of glass did not even register. It was the paroxysm of panic that was the issue. It tore through his body. His bones rattled. His heart contracted, clenched in dread. He broke into a cold sweat. This was accompanied by tremors. He grit his teeth ... and was able to wiggle his way out of the vice-like grip of her killing intent. Waraji was less fortunate. The man was brought to his knees. He sported a set of lacerations, was a blubbering mess. He rambled incoherently, begged for mercy. Satsuki rubbed her nails against her hakama and blew at them a couple of times. She squinted at them and clucked her tongue. Then she pushed off the table she was sitting on. Stepped up to Waraji. Knelt before him and hooked a thumb under his chin, then gently pushed upwards till he met her gaze. Your friend was a rabid dog. This she said without inflection. And you, Waraji, are a gutless fraud. Now you will do exactly as I say ... or else I will send you the way of your dear departed friend. The man managed a muffled whimper, a terrified nod. She let go of his chin. His eyes rolled back. He crumpled bonelessly. Satsuki stood and turned to Naruto. You. Something shifted behind the impenetrable veil of those obsidian eyes. Unagim the 3rd degree now, sensei. Naruto squared his shoulders and stared back, daring her to censure him. What's the point? What's done is done. Her voice was flat. It was as inscrutable as he'd seen her look. I'll do you a favor and leave this out of the mission report. But next time, try not to be such a bleeding sentimentalist. He did not feel guilt. It was an odd admission, one that sounded wrong, even to him, one that defied all reason, but now that the hysteria had faded, now that he was no longer hyperventilating, now that he was left to his own devices, Naruto ambled about the town, uncaring, surrendered himself to the night and its starry vault, the stars' firebrand shimmering through a cataract of cloud cover. And the guilt did not come. He killed a man in cold blood. He had held him by the throat and looked him in the eye, then gemmed the landscape with a necklace of his innards. Intestines, like links of a chain, had spooled out, intertwined with them was the central nervous system. The entire thing was a grotesquerie of primal ostentation, fleshly ornaments linked through the crushed remains of a man's excretory organs. It was a scene of carnage, a summation of every single thing he condemned, the foulest and the most barbaric of murders ... and, despite all this, there was no guilt. No sense of triumph either. No vindication. But no guilt. The man had bled out. He was a stranger, he was a monster. He defiled people. Destroyed lives. He had accumulated atrocities under his name. And he deserved his fate. A part of Naruto wondered if that made him less human than he wished to be. He stared at his hands which no longer shook and wondered if the lack of self-condemnation made him no different from those he chastised. He couldn't find it in himself to give a shit either way. He drifted from the center of town and approached its periphery. All at once he came to a dead halt, stood still and stared. He had unwittingly made his way to the bridge. It towered over him, a bulwark, though half-built. A brutish superstructure. Ugly even in the sheen of moonlight, twisted, ribbed with rebar, steepled with steel, a metal contraption, an unholy abomination. But to the people here, he thought, it was the most beautiful of monuments, the most sumptuous of constructs, worth more than a memorial, worth the highest of heavenly odes. It was a land's liberty, a land's last hope. It had the gloss of human expectation to it, and that beautified it, rescued it from the architectural destitution of its construction, and, as he stood staring, it seemed to expand, seemed to swell and touch the skies, and become a seat fit for any deity, a glorious golden passageway that linked the earth to the emperor. Naruto was lost in such thoughts when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around. And there he was. The man he had spent 3 weeks searching for. The man who could not be found. The man Tazuna said did not exist. He had a wooden leg, he propped himself up with a staff, but stood ramrod erect. He was broad-shouldered and benign, his statuesque posture radiated an air of authority, an aura of assertiveness. In the splash of nightlight he looked like a bronze god. "You're Naruto Uzumaki." It wasn't a question. "Yeah." The man's weathered face blossomed into a grin. "Glad to meet you, Uzumaki-san." He extended a hand. "My name is Kaiza and I've come to beg you for your help." There were men, he had heard of these men of myth, these men of yore, these deities who in their determination hewed a fresh trail in a woodland, who vaulted the heavens and brought from there a flame for men, who fought the gods to a stalemate and were so utterly obstinate that they fragmented reality, reshaped it to their will. As they stood there and argued in the dark, and as Kaiza, in tandem with the elongating shadows, grew larger than life, Naruto had an inkling that this was one such man of myth. And all he wanted to do was deck him in the face and break his jaw. "Listen here, you shithead," he growled, "I dunno what hopium you've inhaled, but I'm telling you give this up." The man furnished him with a tolerant smile, which was suffused with kindness. He had sporadically been smiling that way for the last 10 minutes, and it grated like hell, because Naruto in equal parts admired and envied it, while also loathing it. This was a deity, this was a deluded man, this was a man with death writ in bright red font on his forehead, and this was a man who did not care, he did not fucking care. "There is an injustice happening before my eyes," Kaiza said, "and I refuse to make my peace with it. Don't you see how fucking pointless this is? You can live, man. Just let this go, and he'll leave and give you back everything. I appreciate your concern, Uzumaki-san. But Gado cannot bring back the people he killed, nor do we trust him to keep his word. Men like him are fickle. No, not just fickle evil. We'd rather die than remain silent and submit to the likes of him." This was delivered with a determined gleam in the eye. Naruto choked back a helpless laugh. He felt hysteria building at the back of his brain. Any moment now it would pour out, a profusion, a torrent, and with it would tumble out the confession of just how he admired this man and his audacity, how liked the place, how adored Shiho, how sympathized with the people here and saw in their fate his own. A confession that would lead nowhere. One that would only prolong everyone's suffering. "There ain't no rather," he choked out, heaving back the strain of sentiment. "You ain't being given a choice here, hero. It'll take 1 second to break your neck. This ain't no resistance, it's a massacre. It's over. It's done. Pack it up. The second we got involved y'all were finished. So please. Please. For the love of God, stop this bridge of yours. I'm begging you. I don't want another man's blood on my hands." There was something akin to disappointment in Kaiza's demeanor. His face fell, his hands tightened around his walking stick, he stopped altogether and sighed, looked at the unfinished bridge and sighed again. "Then I'm sorry to say we must part ways here, because I don't want the blood of thousands on mine either. Fuck's sake, man. Why won't any of you ever ... Naruto took deep breaths to calm himself. "Okay, just ... stop. Think logically for a second, alright. My sensei will kill you, and then this place is doomed anyway. You're doing good right now. You're giving these people hope. Your death will break him. Hope without action, Uzumaki-san, is meaningless. The dead don't act," Naruto snapped. "They just lie there, rotting. And their dreams rot with them." Kaiza's face eased into a grin. "I'm a little thick in the head," he said. "I've had that said to me 1,000 times, not least by my own wife ... but I never listen." Naruto's shoulders slumped. His protestations were half-hearted, he'd had no real hope of changing this man's mind. He admitted, if only to himself, that if he were in Kaiza's shoes, he'd have done the same. But he ... could not leave it like this. There was absolutely no doubt in his mind that Satsuki would make good on her threat if she got to know that he had failed. So failure, however much desired in secret, was not an option. The man surprised him by putting an arm around his shoulder. "Walk with me, Uzumaki-san." His voice was gentle. Understanding. The man did not wait for a response. He hobbled on ahead, and Naruto's feet led him to follow. They left the bridge behind and wound their way through alleyways beset by decay. They were meshed in between decrepit huts and preyed on by a kaleidoscope of shadows. Every now and then the faint flicker of an oil lamp would intrude on them. Then they would look in and see poverty personified, poverty embedded in skins and minds, in emaciated frames and the protrusion of bones, and even in the soft greetings cried out, which emerged in exhausted exhalations, void of volubility, void of strength. Aiza would return their greetings. Every once in a while he halted and exchanged a kindly word or three, professed concern, inquired about problems, gave hope where necessary, promised action where necessary. And through it all Naruto stayed in the background, blended into the dark, drew into himself and observed as an outsider the sympathy this man had for his people and the trust they bequeathed him with. He was a lot quieter when Kaiser returned to his side. They left the alleyway and walked towards the town square. "You see, I have this belief." Kaiser stared into the distance. There was nothing authoritative about his voice, it was the voice of a tired man. "People call me mad, but over the years it's just solidified. I believe there is not one place in this world that can withstand a righteous man." "What's that even supposed to mean?" "It means that you may kill me, Uzumaki-san. But someone else will always take my place and continue this struggle." "You still ain't listening." Naruto's words emerged in an odd mixture, half a laugh, half a strangled sob. "They'll burn this damn place to the ground. There ain't no struggle." "Maybe there isn't." Here Kaiser stopped and turned to face him. A knowing smile kindled his face. "But if, as you say, all were lost, then why kill Ori and save the girl? If you truly believe we are a people condemned, then why do it?" "How do you know about that?" "It's all over the town. No one talks about anything else." The light bulb went off in Naruto's head. "That's why you approached me?" Aiza leant on his walking stick, inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I did not wish to," he said, "but desperation makes beggars out of the best of us. So here I am, pleading with the shinobi hired to take my life, in the hope that there's some humanity in him. I can't do it. I won't do it. I won't kill you." Naruto swore, raking a hand through his hair. "Ain't gonna make any such promises about my sensei, though." "Who is it?" "Uchiha Satsuki." "That's a name I haven't heard in a while." Kaiser looked troubled. "You know her?" "Not personally, no. I was in the audience at her Chunin exam. It was, 6-7 years ago." Kaiser stared at the sky, recollecting something. "She made an impression. Stood out due to how young she was. Just a child. There was something very sinister. He shook his head. She faced again an almost a decade or senior and tore his head clean off. There was no expression, no remorse. The memories stayed with me. I had no idea she was a Jonin now. People like that, they're either dead by 10 or a Kage by 21. And that renewed Naruto's desperation. "You sure you don't want to negotiate?" He hated the hint of plea that entered his voice. He did not want to lose his friendship, he did not want to be responsible for this man's death and this land's ruin either. "It's simple for me." There was a note of finality in Kaiser's voice. "I refuse to watch my people die of sickness and starvation. Till the day I have breath left in me, till the day this voice works and these hands move and this heart beats, I'll be out there, by my bridge, inspiring my people to build the gateway to their freedom. Because it's the only future left to them. To us." And that settled that. Naruto was forced to pick a side. Aiza read his thoughts. "There's a job that needs doing," he said softly, "and we need your help with it. I leave it to you to decide if you want to come join us. But know this. Without you, we will fail. We're out of time already and you are our last hope. Come with me." The man took a left turn. Led him down a row of houses that were once posh, but that now moldered away. Half were unoccupied, the other half had no lights, though he had a sense of being observed from behind blinds and beveled windows. The man took him to the end of the street, then threw out an arm to encompass the ruined remains of a bungalow. It was blackened and charred and gave off an aura of being possessed by a spirit. There was a scent of ash to it, even now that scent clung to it like a lament, like cheap perfume. The walls were soot-stained, the roof had caved in, the glassless windows were empty eyes staring into the void. "This was her house," Kaiser said. He removed the padlock and pushed the gate. It grated at the hinges, then swung open with a rusted creak. Flecks of paint fell off the front, a silver shower. Aiza directed that he follow. There were cavities in the burnt front door, these were fungal mouths, they emitted a sour stench that on viscid wings trekked the air and made the journey to Naruto's nostrils, their flowering, their burrowing and making him heave and retch. Kaiser covered his nose and kicked open that teakwood door, which by some miracle had survived the fire. The rest of the place wasn't as lucky. The insides were torched, dust and ash like spring rain swirled when they stepped in. The planks underfoot were fetid and in some places gave way to stone, a snake slithered away at the patter of their feet. In the sitting room, clear despite the ash, was a mammoth blotch dried blood. A charred skull kept it company. And that's all that's left of her father. Naruto did not need to be told it was Shiho that Kaiser was talking about. Aiza spread out his arms. Captured the room, its doom and gloom, its declivities and indents, its frozen laments, forever lost to time. At one end was a cradle, burnt and broken, at the other, the skull. Birth and death, tied together by the twine of suffering. Through the ashen stench the room seemed a coal furnace spent. Do we deserve to live like this? There was quiet anger in Kaisa's voice. It simmered but did not rise. Are we criminals? Sinners? All we've asked for is the most basic of human dignities. We want to live freely. We want to be treated as people, not livestock. They can't even give us that. He dropped his hands. The likes of Gado and those whom you serve, Kaisa said, they're used to taking and taking. They never expect anyone to retaliate. They're bullies who see us as animals fit for only servitude and slaughter. And I'm sick of it. It's time someone stood up to them. There was determination in his countenance. In that moment, in the shadows of that room haunted by the past and rife with its own ghosts, Naruto saw the deity everyone talked about, the righteous man akin to a god, for his eyes flamed and his words rattled off the walls and sent up eerie echoes, all of which enhanced his message. Tell your mentor there will be no negotiations. We refuse to give in to a tyrant. We understand how this may end, we're just past the point of caring. What's left for us, Uzumaki-san, and here the walls reverberated and threw back ripples of his name so that it felt to Naruto as though the dead were calling, the dead demanding that they be avenged, when our children starve and our women are openly defiled. There's terror on our streets and the rich and the poor eat from one begging bowl. We have no choice but to fight for the right to live. If we can't be free, then we prefer the dignity of death over prolonged suffering. Now, as for you, if you so desire, then you can leave this land to the inhumanity of its fate. But I believe the human will can defy fate itself. So if there's even a speck of humanity left in you then please, consider helping us. Aiza had given him until dusk to decide. Naruto had returned late last night and sleep had been a stranger to him. He tossed and turned and wrung his hands, and just as he'd finally dozed off, Satsuki knocked on his door and told him to prepare for the day's ordeal. So here he stood, shaking away the silken persuasions of slumber and coaxing himself awake by degrees. Coaxing himself awake and trying his utmost to avoid thinking about the rebellion, for no matter how he sliced and diced it, there was a sense of fatalism attached to it. That fisherman held out a poison chalice, to drink from it was to die, or at the very least run the risk of death. It was a point of no return. It would bring to an end any pretensions of passivity. It would be the death of everything he had styled himself into, for the man extended an olive branch into a world of activity, but as a champion of justice this time, and not of atrocity. Naruto was leaning towards it. It set his heart afire. It gave him hope. It promised to return to what he had been before the truth about his father soured his optimism and set his spirit to slumber. It meant fighting for a worthwhile cause, it meant standing with the weak and being their talisman. His conscience was definitely nudging him in that direction. Comfort is the enemy of greatness. More immediately, though, there was a session to get through while sleep deprived. So he cleared his mind and tried concentrating. And you're the enemy of my sleep. The girl had no sympathy for him or the bags under his eyes. She seemed oblivious to his internal struggles. She pointed to a spot in the distance. 35 paces. They fell into a pattern. They went back and forth in silence. Streaks of lightning scabbed the terrain. But Naruto was sluggish, and it showed. His mind was elsewhere, his temperament was irate, his movements were limited, he could not concentrate, and so over and over the lightning flicked his nose, licked his hands, lapped at his forehead and his feet, till he was singed, and till all at once, he let out a howl of agony when stricken above the eye. It left behind a reddened welt. His vision blurred. The world dissolved, flickering in and out of white pockets before stabilizing and re-emerging autumnal, albeit not without flashes, and not without the sensation of a star having burst before his eyes. Son of a bitch, he bit out, massaging. His hand came away sticky. Half an inch lower, and that was his left eye. That was careless. Satsuki came over. She stood on her toes so that she was eye level with him. Looked at his wound. Clucked her tongue and started to heal him. You ain't even looking while throwing, he accused. That was shoulder height. You ducked into it. Naruto sighed. Played back the sequence in his mind. So he had. Concentrate, she said. This is life and death. Where is your mind? Didn't sleep well. Satsuki grazed the top of his eyelid with her thumb, then brought it away and looked at it. Stared into the cut again. Seemed satisfied she'd done no lasting damage. You won't sleep well most of the time. She rubbed her thumb against her hakama. That goes hand in hand with this profession. Do not let it get to you. Do not let it affect your performance. Yeah, I know. Be a block of stone, be a stone-cold killer. He made an impatient gesture, shooing her away, suggesting that they get on with it. She stepped away, but maintained eye contact. Kept staring at him in silence, till he gave up and looked at her. Don't be scared of making mistakes here, she said. Huh? If you're wrong out there, she gestured languidly into the distance, then you're dead. But you don't have to be embarrassed here. It's okay. It's just me watching, and I'm your mentor. I'll always be there to refine your technique. Embarrassed? How on earth had she jumped to that conclusion? I ain't embarrassed. Is that what you think? It just stings like hell. You've never reacted this way to pain before. There's always a first time. I see. Her expression relaxed. Then remember that pain, she said, and the next time I do this, she flicked her fingers, I want you to avoid it. They got back into position and went at it again, the lightning crackling, then springing forth. And Naruto tried, he honest to God tried this time to track her movements and to anticipate her shifts in tempo. For some time he even succeeded. But as the day wore on, and as the weight of choice weighed him down, his mind once more meandered through mazes of thought and circled back to the rebellion. Footwork. He gnashed his teeth, read her momentum, slipped right, juked left, and then when caught in the midst of a zigzag pattern, clumsily cartwheeled backwards, his palms scraping stone, flickers of blue rustling at his jacket. He came to rest in a crouch. Tried refocusing. She cut the distance and gave him no breathing room, slashed downwards, so that the lightning forked around him, a spiral of barbed wire. Another twist, and the spiral contracted the metal mouth of a bear trap. He leapt out of it at the last second, but not without being snared around the ankle. The hem of his track pant sizzled and turned to shen. He stumbled backwards and left on the terrain blotches of red which resembled the residue from a wine glass smashed. Motherfucker. Fluidity, Satsuki hummed, cutting the distance again, the lightning retracting, then spilling forward, a whip this time. Relax. Breathe. You're too rigid. You're moving as if you're swimming through concrete. He lumbered on, noticeably slower, for there was a numbness around his shinbone, and it was spreading up his leg. The lightning nicked his shoulder next dodge. And it was at this moment that Naruto decided he was done with her farce. So he stayed planted, and when the spool of lightning circled back his way, he concentrated wind chakra around his palm and bisected the attack in half. The resultant sound was a gale-given voice. Sparks flew, the plain around them was flecked with a shower of blue. Satsuki raised an eyebrow in response. I told you to dodge. What's wrong with blocking? The pain was a serrated blade being twisted around the core of his Achilles. Dear God, he needed some respite. Keep her talking. Buy time. Try not to die. I'm drilling basics. Satsuki threw her arms out, as if to demonstrate. Her sleeves, which were a size too large, slid back and gave him a glimpse of thin wrists with a tracery of faded scars grooved into them. When you block, she said, you've wasted time on a defensive technique. You are planted. You are reactive. On the other hand, if you evade, you can hit back immediately. She clapped her palms together to make her point. Evasion is speed-based, Naruto pointed out. Speed's a young guy's thing. My apologies. Her expression turned sympathetic. I forgot you were 100 years old. Stay put. I'll go get a wheelchair, Grandpa. Aging? Naruto grinned. You might have heard of it. Everyone gets old. Then they ain't as fast. Old Shinobi, she returned, unruffled, are quicker than you think. But not as quick as they once were. No, she conceded, but quick enough that evasion is a feasible approach for them too. You mean to tell me, Naruto's face reflected his disbelief, that old man Sarutobi will dodge this shit? Yes. At 35 paces, yes. Maybe even at 25. You're such a liar, goddammit. That old man needs a mobility scooter to get around. Dodge. He'd pull his back, he'd tear a ligament. Nonsense. That. He hopped from foot to foot, welcoming the way the numbness faded, welcoming the cessation in pain. Bet. I got a brick at home. I'll hide it in my jacket and throw it full speed the next time we're in his office. If his head goes splat, it's on you. Even if his speed is gone, Satsuki sighed, he is still the Hokage, Naruto. He can afford to block. Are you a Hokage? I can be, Naruto confided, after I complete my bloody coup d'etat with that brick. Then I'ma be your boss, lady. He puffed out his chest and poked it with his thumb. Worship me. Yes, Hokage-sama. My first order, Jonin, he mimicked the Hokage's bent back, his somber manner, his stuffy way of speech, his tendency to steeple his hands together, is that you go drown yourself in the lake. The lake of your tears from our sparring session. The lightning at her fingertips hummed. My second is that you lighten up a lil. 'Tis good for the heart. We've already established that I have none. We'll find you one, he promised. Take the Hokage's. His head's gone, he won't need it. Indeed. Satsuki nodded. If you are done discussing treason, then may we return to our lessons. You're such a spoilsport. Back to your position, she said, her eyes shining. No blocking this time. And so it went. On and on it went, his performance erratic, peaking, plateauing, peaking again, then tanking altogether, the cycle repeated, and so it went, till the sun shone overhead and sweat trenched its way through his tracksuit, turning it damp. Noon was on them. Progress had been made, though it was hard won, and though it came at the cost of minor disfigurements and moderately inconvenient scorch marks. Eventually Satsuki signaled a halt to the day's proceedings. fetched an encouraging smile from whatever locker her emotions were stowed away in, and produced it before him with a beatific flourish. It was like being given a cup of water in the middle of a desert, albeit the desert here was of her own making. Horrible session. She continued smiling and offered him a thumbs up. As inconsistent as can be. But you soldiered right through it. I don't say this often. But I'm impressed. Always had that. Naruto drew deep breaths. Felt woozy from blood loss. Took measure of his body to ensure there wasn't lasting damage. Tried getting his heart rate to stabilize. She'd run him ragged. And she still did not look particularly worn out. Say whatever you want about me, he gasped, but always been able to take a beating and a half. And you're better for it. She pointed to his feet. Productive footwork. Better range of motion. Better distance management. And I like that you mostly kept your temper in check towards the end, even when I dialed it up a notch. By God, that had been awful. He'd been cramping up, and suddenly the lightning had grown vicious, a veritable viper's tooth. It sprang forward, sank through skin and bone, and inflicted upon him an agony so acute and intense that it was akin to being engrafted into the sun's surface. He'd grit his teeth and suffered through it. He had taken it thrice, and then in a moment of defiant madness, he spat into the ground, pointed at her, and held up his middle finger, all while grinning like a loon. Bring it on, you bitch. I can take everything you throw at me. She'd surprised him with laughter. There was joy in her eyes, and pride and approval. He braced himself for a bristling riposte, but she eased off instead. The lightning thought had lost its whip and snap, and eventually lost shape and sheen too, so that by the time she rolled back her wrist and snuffed it out, he was left with the certainty of having gone up in her estimation. And with that came a feeling of personal triumph. But now the high of the moment had run dry, and the sense of having no more than a few hours to decide the fate of this land dawned on him. With it returned disquiet. He gave into it and was so lost in thought that when Satsuki asked him something, he did not hear her the first time. She repeated her question. Your investigation, she said. Made any progress yet? Yeah. Naruto nodded. Ran into your man last night, actually. And? She tapped her foot and stood there, waiting. He felt compelled to confess, impelled to ask for her aid. The words were at the tip of his tongue, but something held him back, gave him pause. He watched her and was struck by the sense that the land around them had turned into a husk for her sake. Flowers wilted, foliage waned, the soil lost its nutriment, the scenery its luster, all for her sake, and, as he watched, it seemed to him that she sapped into herself all scent and hue, so that even as the land degraded, she, enfolded in all she stole from it, matured, a musk rose in bloom. Thus she fed on the rill of their tears, he thought, thus she cast wider dragnet, which, when reeled back in, brought with it their palpitating doom. Inseparable from the enchantment of her beauty were the fetters of her loyalties, which chained not just her to duty, but him to her and this land to its destitution. She was their gaoler, she was a parasite that scrimmaged through their decrepit innards. From her he would receive no help. So he lied. It's coming along, Naruto promised. He's kinda obstinate. But I think I can talk sense into him. We haven't got all year. A couple of weeks. That's all I ask. Take 3. Your generosity knows no bounds, he gushed. Hand on heart, you're the nicest, kindest sensei any man could ask for, propaganda and bloodthirst aside. You called me a sadist 10 minutes ago. That was 10 minutes ago. Naruto gave a dismissive wave. I was a younger man, not yet wise to the world and its ways. The times, oh how they change. And we mature with them. Right. She rolled her eyes. Satsuki turned and went to fetch her canteen. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. It was a complicated dance, this he truly regretted that their camaraderie had so swiftly devolved into a game of shadows, a sequence of smoke and mirrors. A part of him wished for nothing more than to subserve to her and place in her the entirety of his trust, but there yet remained a more obdurate part, which recognized he had a conscience to cater to. How are you holding up? She'd returned with her canteen. She threw him a bottle too. I live. Don't like the rate at which you're punching holes into me, he held out his arm, which was bleeding, but I live. Not that. She gave his arm a cursory glance. The other thing. Huh? Satsuki gestured to a tree in their vicinity. Walked over and sat down in the shade. Signaled that he join her. Petted the ground next to her. Sit, she ordered. He went over. Sat. You killed a man the day before yesterday. Oh. Yeah, what about it? He must have looked abrasive, what with his chin up and his shoulders squared, because Satsuki's response was to raise her hands, palms pointing outwards. A placatory gesture. A signal that she meant no harm. This isn't a cross-examination, she indicated. Do you regret it? She asked. Did he? He hadn't given it much thought. There was no guilt. But if tossed into that situation again, only this time with a better sense of self-restraint, would he still do the same? Did he want to be a murderer? He deserved to die, Naruto said softly. Satsuki offered him a dainty half-shrug. Perhaps, she said. Who lives, who dies. These things are beyond me. I don't decide on them, not personally anyway. If it's an order, then it must be enforced. There's no room for sentiment there. But this wasn't. Would you have killed him? It was an impulsive question. I just said it's not for me to. Yeah. I heard you the first time. But say he made a chopping motion towards the town square with his hand, say you were out there. Say you saw this man hurt people. Kick him around, you know. Bully him. Take joy in their terror. You really gonna sit there and tell me it wouldn't make your blood boil? She smiled thinly, as though privy to some inside joke. It wouldn't, she said. It isn't for me to judge him. This might shock you, Naruto, but if compassion is your metric for measuring humanity, then I am objectively a terrible person. He thought of Shiho, thought of the smile Satsuki had worn while healing her. Was reminded of her tenderness in that moment, the sense of joy that had thrummed through her frame. That's bullshit, he retorted. Her eyebrows went up. I beg your pardon. I said it's bullshit. I refuse to believe that you're this the stone-cold killer who'll only do shit if ordered. I refuse to believe you ain't got no conscience. No heart. There's not one person anywhere in this world who's so lacking in humanity that they won't rage in the heat of an unjust moment. Everyone's got grudges. Pressure points. A conscience. No one's professional, not to that level. Something shifted behind Satsuki's eyes, something dangerous. Her face relaxed into impassivity. When I was 7, she said measuredly, my brother massacred my clan. I was the only survivor. There was a definite edge to her voice, though she herself seemed unaware. I stumbled through my clan district. The bodies of my relatives squelched underfoot. I saw my brother stand over my parents. I saw them dead. In the space of a night I lost everything I lived for. That was 8 years ago. And to this day, that man still roams free. She took a deep breath. Closed her eyes, as if to calm herself. And I let him. She opened her eyes. I have the power to stamp Itachi out like the worthless little insect he is. But I don't. You know why? She leaned in. Stopped half an inch from his face. Stared into his eyes. Because I'm a professional, Satsuki whispered. And because revenge is the basest of emotions. A shinobi swayed by emotion is worthless, that's what I was taught. My life belongs to the village. And when they demanded that I forsake my vengeance, I gladly did so. If someday they ask me to hunt down Itachi, then he will die by my hand. But till that day arrives, he is irrelevant to me. So do tell me, Naruto, about how I would overstep directives and act on my conscience. Conscience. That's a word without meaning, it's the last refuge of the weak. Her voice, unbeknownst to her, had steadily risen. Her cheeks were stippled with crimson. Her face, as he watched, twisted and took on an expression that was in equal parts incensed and tormented. She looked trapped in a margin between two worlds and seemed unaware of it. Naruto said nothing. But in that moment the last flicker of hope he'd had about asking her for aid was extinguished. He now knew with certainty he could never breathe a word about Kaiza to her. But enough about me. Satsuki recovered her composure. Leant away. Looked into the distance. Suggested through her tone and demeanor that she wanted no sympathy, nothing conciliatory. Her clan, as far as she was concerned, was off limits, mentioned impulsively, and now once more banished to the interstices of memory. This is about you. It was a simple question. Do you or do you not regret what you did? Naruto hesitated. Tried reorienting himself. Replayed his actions. Visualized them vividly. Waited for some squeamishness to set in, some daub of discomfort. It did not come. He felt nothing. It had been 2 days, yet he still felt nothing. She was watching him through hooded eyes, and he had a sudden epiphany. She did not have the words for it, but in her own odd way she was concerned about him. Despite her rant about professionalism, despite her various biases and one-eyed takes, she still inquired into his well-being, still seemed intent on ensuring he was alright, and this despite not having to do so. She could have kept silent. He would be none the worse for it. But she felt obliged to ask. And once more Naruto found himself unable to reconcile these contradictions. But her concern obliged him to be honest, at least in this regard. I held him up, Naruto said slowly. I looked him in the eye. I reveled in his helplessness, his terror. And then I killed him. He could not bring himself to say. I'd do it again if I had to. I'm not you, I'm no shinobi, I'll never be a professional, not in the way you are. But I feel no regret over it. Maybe that makes me a monster, maybe I am the Kyuubi, but put me there 100 times, and every single time I'd do it. I'd gut him without hesitation, because some people deserve death. And that comes down to the same conscience you just shat on. And somehow she understood. He had a feeling Satsuki saw right through him, saw the conflict within. And though her first kill and the memory of it had in all likelihood faded, though her reasons for it must have been professional, not moral, though she could not possibly understand why he so hallowed the idea of humanity, he, after all, had been a beast to the world his entire life and so spited professionalism. Naruto had a sense of being scrutinized and fully embraced for who he was, separate from the thing in him. It was in her half-smile. Her countenance mellowed, her eyes lit up with a glimmer of sympathy. "I've done worse," she admitted. "You just said you don't." "I did." She nodded. "Never for myself, and never out of a conscience. Nonetheless, I have done worse. I don't want to be like you." He hadn't intended for it to sound so rude. Her response was laughter. She reached out and patted his cheek. There was fondness in what she next said, so that the words, when they emerged, sounded teasing. "Cheer up. You won't be like me. You don't know that." "I do." The levity was gone. There was an ironclad certainty in how she said it. With those two words she placed in him a level of faith he'd never had in himself. "Seriously, though? You don't know me well enough to say that." "What's there to know? You're not me. As you once said to me, you'll never be me. And that's alright. I like you the way you are. It's not every day that one runs into a soft-hearted pacifist with a will of iron and a dreadful sense of humor. Yet you smile at my jokes." "Yet I smile at your jokes," she agreed. There was warmth in his heart. "At times," he confided, and it tumbled out in a rush, "at times I'm kinda scared that what I got inside might be affecting me. I feel at times like ... like I'm the Kyuubi, you know what I mean." She did laugh this time. "Who would mistake you for the Kyuubi? You're about as threatening as a stuffed toy. Hey. I killed a man. And, as you just said to me," there was a hint of humor in her voice, "perhaps he deserved to die." There was a forest adjoining Wave. A forest with a lake at its center. He sat glumly by that lake. It was mid-noon. The sun set the leaves afire, they were tinctured red. The scent of pinewood and moss was all around him. He sat in the shade of a covert, sat beside a multiplicity of flowers, for the forest had bloomed. The petals were like lid lashes fresh with tears, they were wet with dew, and this despite the heat. Naruto sat there and stared at the lake. His hopes and dreams were a vessel gliding through that water body. He played around his mind's eye, reimagined the lake into a sea. He added detail ... the sea turned tempestuous. The ship of his dreams was battered by tides, was tossed about and sucked into the center of a vortex. The mast crashed through the cabins, the sails came undone, the prow was chewed into chips of wood. Ropes and planks were rendered adrift. Men vaulted over the whittled edges in terror and were swallowed up. Their rafts flipped over. Their belongings, with their being, spilled into the bottomless deep, there to tangle with seaweed. The remains of that once noble hulk sank rank, reduced to wreckage. He chuckled softly, put a lid on his envisionings, and looked away. Returned to thought. The permutations of Wave so befuddled him and so took up all his concentration that he started when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He almost swung his fist on instinct, then half turned and realized it was only Satsuki. "Where did you come from?" "I get around." She sat down next to him and handed him a box. "You missed lunch. You're a dietitian now, too." "The sensei. A good one." "That's for me to judge." There was genuine curiosity in her eyes. "Judge me, then. Tell me your assessment. Your teaching's like your tea. Bitter as hell. Hazardous to my health. Then you'll be happy to hear I did not make that." She gestured towards the box. "Eat." He took a bite. "Not the worst lunch I've had. Waraji." She nodded. "My threats work wonders. He'll poison us one of these days. I'm immune to most poisons." "Not me. Not that I know of, anyway. So let's not test my resistance, eh? We can fix that. I have a snake summoning contract lying around somewhere. Won't sign. Don't like snakes. They're beautiful. They're disgusting." Naruto shuddered theatrically. "They're creepy crawlies. They show up at godforsaken places and bite you for no reason. Had one get into my bathtub when I was a kid. I ain't touching them." Her face lit up. She'd had an epiphany. "You're scared of them. Ain't. Are, too. ... Where did you nick a snake summoning contract from, anyway?" Naruto cleared his throat. Changed the subject. There was still the shadow of a knowing smirk on her face, but she allowed him the topic switch. "My sensei gave it to me," she said. "You have a sensei?" "Everyone has a sensei. Why would I be different?" "Oh no. You sound like the kind of girl who gives people lectures instead of listening to them." "I listen to you. I'm special. Specially abled, for sure." Naruto looked up. Noted the dark clouds moving into position. It would rain come nightfall. "So," he whistled, which Jonin turned you into the humorless husk you are, again. She tucked an errant lock behind her ear. "Mitarashi Onko. Never heard of her. I'll introduce you. You like her. She's a buffoon, like you. But she's also very good at what she does. Unlike you." Someday I'll kick the bucket. Naruto's expression was solemn. And that will be that. Then you'll regret these jibes. You'll think of me and cry. But it'll be too late to say sorry. I'll die broken-hearted, I'm sure. Her tone was dry. Worse. You'll crave forgiveness and never find it. Were you always this melodramatic? It's a talent. Naruto grinned. She patted his hand. Good. She looked and sounded as if she were holding out her half-eaten meal to a street urchin. At least we found something you're talented at. You're the one that keeps selling me on my talents as a shinobi. Satsuki inclined her head. So I am. The silence settled over them. It brought placidity with it. They sat there by the pier and stared into the lake. She inched forward on impulse and dropped her foot till it touched the water. She swirled her foot about, then startled him with the softest of laughs. This lake brings back memories, she said. Been here before? Not here, no. She had a wistful look. It's just ... I remember standing by a lakeside like this in Konoha, back when my parents were alive. It was raining. It was a bad day. I was annoyed because my brother was in the limelight again and I felt ... inadequate. So I wheedled a fire scroll out of my mother, albeit with a lot of begging, and set out to practice. I wanted to prove ... I had talent too. Satsuki laughed again. It was delightful and lulled the warble of a freshet, a sound brief but bright and floating upwards. The breeze coddled it and carried it into the tree leaves, which shook in response, caressed out of their repose. It sounds silly in retrospect, she admitted. Not to me. Naruto shrugged. I know what that's like, having a chip on your shoulder. Chip on my shoulder? I suppose that's one way of putting it. She stared ahead. Reached out and fetched a pebble. Sent it skipping through the lake's face. It was impulsive. It was the action of a child. She laughed a third time. It's my proudest memory. It sounded like a confession. That day by that lakeside, with that fire technique. It was hard. I was so miserable. I failed more times that day than I have ever since. And at the end I was no closer to mastering it than I was at the beginning. Her foot made another splash. But I went back, she said. Day after day I dragged myself to that lakeside, and day after day my lungs were on fire and my breath was soot and ash. And so it went, until one day I produced a deluge of flame so mesmeric and monstrous that it far surpassed my wildest expectations. She sighed and was silent for a while. It was our rite of passage. There was a hint of sadness in her voice. Spew those flames and you are no longer a child. And I so badly wanted to be more than a child. I wanted to be treated as ... something more than an afterthought. Swap lives with me, then. Naruto threw up his arms and stretched. Yawned. I'd give an arm and a leg to be an afterthought. My point in recollecting this to you, she said, sounding amused, is to bring up that feeling. Pride. Pride in oneself. It's the best feeling in the world. Despite the vast majority of my formative memories being swept away by the march of time, that one sensation, that outpouring of joy over accomplishment, is still fresh. It might have happened yesterday, it might have happened this morning. All I know is that it will stay with me forever. Satsuki had a knowing look. That's my proudest memory, she said. What's yours? He swam through the shoals of his past and rummaged for happy memories, which were rare events. They were a sprinkling of oyster shells, which held within their clammy surfaces the pearl of joy. He reached back, rummaged ... and came up for breath, empty-handed. I don't know. Naruto rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. Every event which had felt remarkable in the moment was tainted by circumstance. The Rasengan was his greatest accomplishment ... The Rasengan was indelible proof of the father who had forsaken him, placing the village over him. Learning it in innocence linked him to the man, reminded him of his idolatry, which had turned into hate. The headband was a weight he could not be rid of. He was friendless, her aside. And the corridors of his childhood were lonely. The years had tumbled into the void, half of them spent seeking validation, the other half spent in resentment of everyone, himself included. Find one, then, she urged. Create one, if necessary. It keeps you going through some very difficult times. What would you know about that, huh? You've never failed. Ain't that one of the first things you said to me? I've come close a few times. She kicked out at the water again, albeit this time less gently. I was in the Anbu. We're skilled, but not omnipotent. Hadake senpai and I were once trapped behind enemy lines. It was in Iowa. It was years ago. He had fainted. I'd given up. There was just too much terrain to navigate and my reserves were running low. I could reverse summon ... but the mission was incomplete. And to leave in failure was to leave disgraced. I preferred death over that. She pushed at the inside of her cheek with her tongue. So I bunkered down, she said. They'd brought out the big guns ... There was a search party converging on us, 2 Jinchuriki, Kitsuchi, 4 entire platoons. She shook her head, lost in thought. Nibbled her lip. We were destined to die, Naruto. I felt it in my bones. There's a cold that comes over you when you realize it. And it was all over me. My body was cold, my blood was frozen. I was frightened. That one childhood memory of mine, however it got us out. That reminisce of my proudest moment. He must have looked skeptical, because she elaborated immediately. When I lay in those trenches, spent, Satsuki said, awaiting the inevitable, I was reminded of that lakeside. I remembered how I'd taken up the gauntlet my brother threw down. I'd surpassed him. I'd broken my back to get into the Onbu. I'd earned the right to be behind enemy lines. I'd earned the right to live. And I wasn't going to die there. She shrugged and offered him a half smile. Sometimes, she said, it's just that simple. I decided I was not going to die. And I did not. Which is why I took great pride in your defiance this morning. You fought when you were finished. You stood and fought, no matter how far I pushed you. You spat into the ground and taunted me, uncaring of the consequences. You risked insubordination. A sin, to be sure, but the greater sin would have been to give up and let me walk all over you. Satsuki stood. Took the lunchbox from him. Suggested through her tone and demeanor that their conversation had run its course. Keep that attitude, Naruto, she gave him a wink, and someday the world will be at your feet. There was a familiarity come evening in how silence swallowed up sound. Naruto walked through the town square and was struck by a sense of a deja vu. He almost laughed aloud at the stares that greeted him. It was like being back in Konoha. He was a celebrity now, he supposed. A murderer. A monster. Those stares were sabers through styrofoam. They hacked away at his psyche, and there was nowhere to hide. So he strolled through their silence and endured, threw about his arms and whistled, pretended their judgment did not matter, though it did, though it always had. He ignored the part of him which wilted and scanned the crowd for a sliver of acceptance. Tried quashing the wallflower in him, but it was a many-headed thing, this hollow hope of validation, this bone-deep desire to be humanized. Life, unfortunately, wasn't a judgment-free zone, he thought. Destiny was a prophecy set in stone, and this was his lot. He'd never be free, no matter what the place and who the people. He was tethered to a wheel of suffering at birth, and he'd whirl with it till time enacted its erosion or wore its erasure. What a shit way to live. What a shittier way to die. It was in the midst of such musings that he heard Shiho's cry. He knew without turning that it was directed at him. Naruto closed his eyes. Considered taking to the rooftops. The last thing he needed at the moment was to be judged by that little girl as well. He'd done so much for her, and would still do more if need be. He'd do it with a smile, but in the end, all it took to curdle their goodwill was one misstep. If she too looked at him as if he were scum on earth, if there were fear in her eyes instead of the usual cheer, then that would hurt, that would render the illusion of helping someone somewhere null and void. Nai-san, wait. Huh. That did not exactly sound like someone cowering in terror at the prospect of confronting their fears. He turned, reluctantly, ever so reluctantly, and witnessed the sight of the daughter dragging her mother along. They came to a halt before him, and then before he could say a word the girl threw herself at him, hugged him. There were tears in her eyes. Nai-san, thank you so much, Shiho said. The mother hovered in the background. She had a package in her hand. She looked uncomfortable. Her head was bowed, but there was something different about her demeanor. It was in the way she carried herself. When she finally met his gaze, her eyes too were glistening, and the haunted look had vanished. She looked as if she had slept peacefully for the first time in a year. She waited for her daughter to step back, then moved forward and stood before him awkwardly. All at once she dropped to her knees and touched her head to the ground so that the soil kissed her matted mane. The sun rays were harp strings that shimmered through her hair, and the ditty they produced was one of thanks. I lost my husband. My daughter was dying, she mumbled. You saved his honor, and you've saved her life. That man you killed. He was a monster. You're our savior. Please accept this gift. I can't ever repay you. But this is a small token of my thanks. She held out the package from her prone position. Naruto unwrapped it, speechless, his head still struggling to process her words. It was a bento box. The rice was grainy and of poor quality, the veggies were wilted. The scent was unremarkable and the substance glutinous, reminiscent of latex oozing from a rubber tree. But despite its drawbacks, that bento box brought tears to his eyes, for it was the first gift he had received. In each of its flavors was a mother's love, in each little grain was the sweetness of gratitude, and so to him it tasted like nectar, like sugarcane pulped, like the sweetest of delight stolen from joy's casket. He bit into it with relish, ate it without shame, ate it regardless of the people watching, and as he looked about, he saw that there was no hate in their eyes either, but love and worship, and a reverence that he had spent his entire life looking for but never found, not until now. An old man approached him. He was a husk. His skin was weather-beaten cardboard, and his limbs were weak from toil. The sun had turned him brown, shrunken him like a raisin dried. Hunger had despoiled him. But there was ardor in his eyes, and his voice, when it emerged, redounded with regard despite its sandpaper roughness. Your name, son? Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, he thought to himself, truly believing it for the first time. I'm the man who helped these people. I am not the Kyuubi. I'll never be the Kyuubi. Our sincerest thanks, Naruto. The old man smiled. From now on, you are one of us. What's your proudest moment? Her question rattled around in his mind, and right then, right there, his heart fluttering, his eyes watering, his mind basking in the well wishes of these people, Naruto had his answer. At that moment, he made up his mind. It was dusk when he set out. He left the crowd and made his way to the bridge. Looked at the note in his hand, on which an address was scribbled. Saw the moon emerge, saw it reflected in the clear stream, which was a crystalline cup overbrimming. Turned right. Made his way past a sequence of flower-pot huge shanties. The house he sought was a small one, well hidden in a side alley. A bulb burned bright on the porch. The porch itself was clean, but the bulb was caked in dust. There were chairs strewn about. These were hewn from oak wood. Despite the dust on them, they gave out a glossy sheen. He stepped onto the porch and stood there for a second, uncertain. The entrance to the house was open. From within there emerged a sound of celebratory laughter. It was a small home, a happy home, and it held all Naruto ever wanted from his own life. It was a little oasis of love in the sands of suffering. It was utterly unremarkable, and in being so it became all the more remarkable to him, because within was a way of life. He'd never had the privilege of experiencing a life that he never could or would experience. Just a fisherman. A fisherman and his family. A fisherman who had become a figurehead, but a fisherman at the end of the day. How some of us wish for the little things in life. Naruto knocked. The slipperless child emerged. Saw him and ran off, then returned and stood before him shyly. A happy child. A happy, happy child. Naruto grinned. I want to talk to your dad for a second, kid. Call him for me, would ya? The child nodded and ran off. A few moments later there came the cumbersome sounds of a walking stick. A man's shadow decorated the doorway. There was no surprise on his face. Just satisfaction. Come to kill me, Uzumaki-san? Kaiza asked. I'll help you, Naruto said. I'll help these people. What do you want me to do? Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the story. If you did, please like the video. Also consider subscribing and sharing this with your friends. This will really mean a lot for me. I'll see you in the next one.